Thank you for having me here. My name is Dave Smith. I love the national parks. They are a part of my life. I have served the last 22 years working in a variety of duties. I clean toilets, I do nature walks, I arrest people, I've treated people that have limbs that are all crazy. I love being a park ranger. It has been an incredible life for me. And during that time, I've seen these incredible things across our country. The American parks they're America. Whether it's Manzanar telling a little story about Japanese internment, whether it's Andersonville telling the story of how Confederate soldiers treated Union soldiers, whether it's the Grand Canyon talking about geology, you put them all together and you've got this great picture of the United States. It's an incredible education for anyone. And raising my family in those parks has been a wonderful privilege, and I'm thrilled by that. I love these parks. Close to 300 million Americans and Europeans and people from around the globe come to these parks every year. We've got over 400 of them now that tell this wide variety of stories. But there's trouble in paradise. Because in 1987, when I was a sophomore in college, I went camping at the Grand Canyon. Had a great time because my parents went camping when I was a kid at the Grand Canyon. That was the high point in visitation for national parks. That year we had 287 million people that came to those parks from around the world, around the United States. That was the high point. That was 25 years ago. And ever since then, it's kind of trickled down, stagnated, trickled down. You go to a national park today, you walk around, you're going to see a lot of people that look like me. You're going to see a lot of middle-class white dudes and gals running around. You're going to see a lot of older Americans running around. You're going to see a lot of Europeans and Japanese visitors and international visitors running around. You're not going to see a perfect picture of America running around inside of their national parks, and that concerns me. It concerns me because I'm thinking about the future. I'm thinking about my kids. I want my kids to grow up and raise their kids the way that I brought my kids up, so that they can actually see this beautiful story of America inside their parks. What a great idea to set aside chunks of land forever so that they can tell our story. I fear that will not be around 50 years from now if we don't have active advocates that are protecting and excited about these parks because they're not going there because they don't feel there's any relevance with those parks. So I work at Brown v. Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas. It's in a very poor section of Topeka. And when I first got there, I was alarmed by the fact that the folks in the neighborhood did not come to the park. And I couldn't figure out why they didn't want to come to the park. Well, I think I figured it out. And I think I figured out the reason why all of these parks across our nation don't necessarily find relevance for the people that live around them and for all Americans. It's because we failed to do something really important. So I'm a bureaucrat. I've gone to school. I have an undergraduate degree in forestry. I have my master's in interpretation. I'm smart when it comes to parks. And you throw a problem at me and I solve it because I'm good at that. And I'll talk to some of my friends and we'll help solve it together. I'm not so good at listening. So if all of you could sit down, looks like you all are sitting down right now. I'm going to blow some crazy things at you right now. What we need to do in the National Park Service and managing our parks and managing our public lands is we've got to listen. We've got to listen. That's all you got to do. It's not that crazy of an idea. Pull our fingers out of our ears, clean the wax out of the ears, and listen to what the people have to say. Now, this is based on 22 years of observation on my part, and I'm going to throw some stories at you right now that might help illustrate the case I'm trying to make. I was working at Grand Canyon about 6-7 years ago, and I was keen. I knew what was going on. I could see the fact that our visitation demographics were not really meeting the demographics of Arizona and the people that lived outside of the park. Why was I not seeing people from the surrounding communities coming in to use the park? Why were not Hispanic visitors from Phoenix coming up to use the park in numbers that were commensurate with people coming from New York City or folks that looked like me? What was going on? So I got together a group of like-minded rangers, a bunch of really cool rangers who have convictions of the heart, bunch of white dudes and gals that look a lot like me to kind of figure out how are we going to get more Mexican-American visitors to want to come into our park. And we got some great ideas. We had some super-duper ideas. And as we're trying to generate these ideas, I bumped into a friend and he said, "You're not going to believe this. The other day, I'm driving into the park and there's a group of Mexican-Americans and they're picnicking on the side of the road on the way right into the park. Like, oh gosh, that's just crazy. And he goes, yeah, and it happened last month too. About a half a mile from the supermarket inside the park, they were on the median of the road, sitting there having lunch. Now, that's kooky. And he goes, yeah, I saw it back in March too. So I scratched my head and go, man, they just, that's crazy. Who would do something like that? That's just silly. They're going to get a ticket for doing something like that. That's against the rules. And then later that week, I'm working down at Phantom Ranch at the bottom of the canyon, and these two guys come running down to the little store that's there, and they're buying refreshments, they're buying salty snacks, they're buying drinks, which you need in the Grand Canyon, and they happen to be Hispanic. And I'm like, wow, Hispanic visitors at the bottom of the canyon, this is so exciting. I said, well, what are you guys doing? And they go, well, we're up at Indian Garden, 4.5 miles up the hill, and we brought our family down. Our grandparents are here, our children, my in-laws are here. We hiked the 4.5 miles down to have a picnic. And we ran out of supplies, so we hiked the additional 4.5 miles down to the bottom of the canyon. Now we're hiking 4.5 miles back up on a hot summer day with our refreshments. I'm like, wow, why are you picnicking in the middle of the canyon? And they said, well, there's nowhere else to picnic. We couldn't find any place in your park to picnic. Wow. And I thought about it, and I've been to 200 national parks probably in my life. We don't have picnic tables. We don't do that because that's not part of the mentality. When I go into a park as a kid, I camped. I went to the campground, and there was a picnic table at the campground, but if you're a visitor coming in for the day because it's the only day you got off, and you can't find a picnic table, what are you going to do? Well, of course, this family, you're going to hike down to the bottom of the canyon so you can have a picnic with your family. You're going to bring grandma down with you. Or you're going to park on the side of the road. But by asking this guy, I got so many solutions. All my time with all my really progressive, smart friends was wasted. All I had to do was actually just listen for a second. Let's turn the clock back another 5 years, where I'm still concerned about Hispanic outreach inside of national parks. I was working at Joshua Tree out in the California desert, and I was seeing the same thing. Lots of senior citizens coming up to look at flowers, lots of climbers that looked a lot like me coming to climb on the rocks, not a lot of people of color. So I got, you know what, I'm going to go down into the valley down below, and I'm going to talk to some of the folks that are there, some of the farmers that are down there, some of the Hispanics that are actually working and living in the valley area, and I'm going to talk to them and find out what's going on. So there was a festival going on down in Mecca, right next to Indio, and I'm hanging out there, 1,000 kids there all day long, and most of them only spoke Spanish, so we had to do all of our dialogue in Spanish. I said, hey guys, I'm a park ranger, I work up there, those mountains right behind you. I work up at Joshua Tree National Park, isn't it cool? And they're like, what's a national park? I said, well, like Yosemite or Grand Canyon or, the White House or we've never been to a national park. And that whole day, I interacted with 1,000 people. They'd never even heard of a national park. They had no concept. They'd come from Sinaloa, they'd come from Sonora, they'd come from the border regions of Mexico, and in their view of life, they'd never interacted inside of a scope where you went to parks and you recreated in a pattern that I did as a child. And I got a lesson that day. I said, you know what? We need to spend more time going down to these communities and actually telling these people, this is your park. Those things belong to you. How do you want to recreate there? What do you want to do out of those parks? So a couple months later, I'm up at Joshua Tree again, and I'm doing something I know. I know this audience. I'm reaching out to the climbing community. Because when I was in high school and college, I used to climb on rocks a lot. It was exciting. It was fun for me to do. So I'm up there. I'm going around the Hidden Valley Campground, and I'm inviting people to Climbers Coffee. The climbers and the ranger had kind of an adversarial relationship sometimes because we had so many rules. They wanted more freedom. And I figured, you know what? I'll have coffee with them. I know climbers. They're cheap. They can't afford food. So I'm going to make them some donuts. I'll make them some scones. I will feed them. I will bribe them. And they will come. And they did. So I'd walk around the campground inviting people, and I come upon this one camper, and it's a woman, and she's African American. And I thought to myself, I've been working here 4 years. I have never seen a single African American woman camping here at Joshua Tree. This is great. So I walk up to her. I terrified her probably because she's still sleeping. It's like, hi, I'm Ranger Dave. Would you like some coffee and some donuts? And she's like, yeah, you freaky man. Yeah, I will have some coffee and donuts with you. Give me some space. And then I said, can I ask you a question? I've never seen an African American woman camp here before. And we're trying to do more outreach to this park, and I'm just kind of clueless. Can you help me out? And she goes, yeah, I'll talk to you about it. This is my first time camping at Joshua Tree, and I'll be honest with you, I was scared. I said, okay, now I understand. I know where you're coming from. My mom, she gets scared too. She's scared of rattlesnakes, she's scared of scorpions, she's scared of mountain lions. That's why she's frightened when she comes to national parks like this. And she goes, oh, no, you got me all wrong. You got me totally wrong. I'm not scared of bugs or snakes. I'm scared of some redneck guys beating me up in the middle of the night and calling me the N-word and hurting me. And I wanted to cry, because when I go into a national park, I feel safe. I see that Arrowhead sign there on the sign as I'm driving to the park. And when I get there, it's like, wow, I'm in comfort now. No one can hurt me. I'm inside of a park. But from her mindset, it's a wilderness area that's dangerous. I'm safe with my family and my city environment, but once I go out of it, I'm in danger. So from her message to me, I heard clearly that we need to convey that to our potential visitors. Parks are safe places. They're places where you can go and you can get recharged. Whether that means having more ranger presence, whether that means doing outreach, I'm not sure what the answer is, but at least now I know what the problem is and why we were having challenges getting at least this one segment of the population there. So I've given you some examples of experimentation that I've tried and or seen, but I've also seen some success stories. And one came when I was working for a historic trail that went from Mexico up to San Francisco called the Anza Trail. And I had a brilliant superintendent. She was a landscape architect, which means she loves to plan. And she knew that the NEPA process, which means you actually have to ask the public what they want whenever you do something big inside of a park, was important. So we were putting up some signs along the California coast that went through some Native American regions, and she said, we got to connect with these communities, these Native American communities, if we're actually going to be doing signage there. And so that's great. And so we got together a big group of people, and she said, well, but you know what else? Why don't we ask them about Spanish culture as well? Why don't we ask them about everything we're doing? And so we sat down at this table in Santa Barbara area, and there were about 12 folks there. There were tribal elders, there were representatives, and we asked them, okay, so how do you feel about the Spanish role in California? We're talking about the Spanish colonial trail that brought Mexicans and Spaniards up into California. How do you feel about this? And this one woman, she was an old elder, she was an elder, so I guess she would be old. This old woman sitting at the corner of the table, and she said, when I think about the Spanish, I thank God, because they brought Christ into my life. They brought Catholicism into California, changed our way of thinking, and saved my soul and saved the soul of all my children. Like, wow, I've never really thought about that. Well, thank you for sharing that idea. And I go to the other end of the table to this young Chicana woman and said, well, how do you feel about the Spanish? And she goes, well, I'll be honest with you, when I think about the Spanish, my blood runs cold, because these are the people that murdered my ancestors, stole the land from us, and continue to have problems in our life because of what they did today. I hate them. So I got this woman over here who loves them. I got this woman over here who hates them. And I realized, wow, not one person can tell the whole story for any particular community in identifying a problem. That's why outreach, civic engagement has to be with as many people as possible from as many communities as possible if it's ever going to work. Down at Saguaro National Park, there's a great success story going on right now. Saguaro is just outside of Tucson in Arizona, and beautiful, beautiful parks, lovely. It's where the big saguaro cacti are. Well, for many years they did something called Fiesta Days. And Fiesta Days was a brilliant idea. Probably a bunch of park rangers that looked like me came up with the idea. We would have a festival every year where we could celebrate Hispanic culture, and it would bring out the Hispanics in the community, and they'd know the park was theirs. So they did it, and every year, hundreds of people would come to Fiesta Days, people that looked a lot like me, to celebrate Spanish culture and break open piñatas and various things like that, but not the audience we were trying to reach. So the superintendent said, well, this is just lame. This is crazy. So she hired a park ranger, and she calls her the Civic Engagement Park Ranger. And her job basically is to go out into the community, identify groups that are underrepresented at the national park, and ask them, what do you need to make this park relevant to you? You know what she found out? Well, a lot of the Hispanic community in Tucson that we're trying to reach, they didn't have cars to actually go up into Saguaro. And Saguaro is designed to go on a loop route. Everyone likes to go there and drive the loop because it's perfect. You see flowers along the way, it's ideal. But you can't see the loop if you don't have a car. And there's no bus service into the park. So she's working on getting bus service to go into the park. And then she said, well, what would you do when you get into the park? What would be significant? They go, well, we want to go hiking. Can we hike from the visitor center where the bus was going to let us off? And she said, well, we don't have a nature trail there. So now she's working on building a nature trail right there. Brilliant way of changing the whole dynamics of it. I told you I work at Brown v. Board of Education, which is in Topeka, in this kind of a rough neighborhood. Well, when I got there, in the first 3 months, we had 3 murders in that community. You know, it's a tough section of Topeka. Topeka's a wonderful town, but the neighborhood around the park, it needs some love. So I began asking visitors at the library, at the supermarket, at church, you know, people in the community, you know, what do you want out of a national park? And one of the first things I heard was, we want a place where our children can be safe, where they're not going to get hurt. Wow. So we started doing an after-school program so the kids could be safe there. They didn't want their kids to be assaulted at all. That's what the most important thing that was going on in their life. And it's changed our business pattern at the park, where we do active engagement all the time with kids and adults in the neighborhood to find out what they want out of their park. So what happens when you have a park and the audience around your park or community is not really excited about the enabling legislation of your park? Well, I would suggest you talk to the people around the park and find out what they want so you can find relevance. Up at Perry's Victory up on the Canadian border, it's a story about the War of 1812. You know, not a lot of people get really jazzed up about the War of 1812. Maybe a lot of you are 1812 aficionados and will get jazzed up by it, but the superintendent there and the staff realized that, and so what are we going to do? Well, we're right on the Canadian border. Let's make another connection. And so each year they bring together kids from Canada and from the United States to have kind of an international training effort together, and they grow together during the course of the school year. It's a brilliant way of doing outreach. Fort Scott, down in Missouri, I took my children down there about a month ago, my son and my daughter. It's right on the border between Kansas and Missouri. It's an old fort from 1830s, 1840s. It's a frontier fort. You know, my kids, I love national parks, but they're like, Papa, not another fort. Please, not another fort. But everything changed when they went into the room and they found out that the very first Kansas colored guards, the first black soldiers in Kansas, got together there back in the Civil War period and gathered there. Because my kids are black. My kids are African American kids. And so for them, that connection was right there. And they had a blast at Fort Scott once they saw that connection right there. I'm really high tech today. I brought my Ranger hat. It's a special hat. It's a Stetson. And it's modeled after the hats the very first park rangers used to wear. The very first park rangers were Buffalo Soldiers. Buffalo Soldiers are African American soldiers that worked the plains after the Civil War, protecting the country at the time. And when the American people of the United States got together and said it was time to create national parks, they called on the U.S. military, they called on the Buffalo Soldiers that were stationed in San Francisco at the Presidio to actually defend those parks. And they rode out there. The very first National Park Service superintendent was an African American man from one of the Buffalo Soldiers groups that were out there. If we can carry that message to Americans across the country, I think it speaks volumes that our parks are meaningful and they are relevant to all communities. It's a matter of reaching out, opening your ears, and listening to what your community needs and what your community wants, and sharing the incredible stories that all of these parks have. You may not realize it, but Fort Scott, on the border, you know what? First Color Guard was there. And they actually speak an amazing story to our audiences. So thank you for letting me share a little bit of time with you. And hopefully I've shared some passion with you that will inspire you to share with Park Service staff like myself what you want out of your national parks.